Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be continuing watching Squid Gem. Today's video is TF2 versus the TFC, the evolution of Pyro. I cannot wait to watch this. The other two we've watched have been about Heavy and Scout, and they were awesome, and I really enjoyed the series. So thank you so much, everybody, for supporting the channel, man. You guys are awesome. And with that being said, if you are new, do not forget to hit that sub button, please, and thank you. And if you want to, you're more than welcome to come hang out with me on Twitch. I'll be sure to put my link in the description down below. With all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, man. Squid Gem's intro is so awesome.
The matches between TF2 and TFC are currently tied at 1-1. We have one victory for each game, and Pyro is going to be the tiebreaker in the fight between Team Fortress Classic and Team Fortress 2. And like Scout, this is another pair that we never really saw directly interact in the comics.
Okay,
But like the previous two videos, this isn't going to be about the Pyros as characters. It's purely going to be based on the stats and functionality of their weapons. So this is not a popularity contest. Because, I mean, it pretty much took until the TF2 comics for the TFC classes to even have any kind of individual personalities. And it did kind of mean retconning some things, because I don't think they planned the TFC Pyro being a woman when they made her sound like this.
Excuse me! I'm in need of medical attention!
She's got the voice of an angel. But for the other rules, there will also be no random crits, for obvious reasons, and no unlocks, for the most part. We do kind of break that rule in this one, but generally because TFC has no unlocks, we don't allow it. If TF2 classes could pick and choose different unlocks for each scenario, it would give an overwhelming advantage that we don't want to have. Weapon stats will also be taken at face value. These are two games from the same series.
Yeah, he does the thing where he does it like in rounds based on health and damage and what your your abilities are and stuff, your passive stuff that you'll get, like it's the last with Scout's double jump, and then to counter that, the TFC had the bunny hop feature. So it's just really cool rounds he puts them in.
And have similar enough mechanics that there's no need to try to artificially even things out. In fact, doing that would kind of ruin the whole thing. And not to break the illusion too much, but these videos are primarily about seeing how the classes change from one game to another.
Yeah.
The versus aspect about this is just a fun framing device, so
it's
don't
cool,
take it
yeah.
too seriously.
I would say it is cool, like it is like the versus, like who would win in a 1v1, but it's more so of like, this is how the character used to be in the first one, and how much has it changed since we've gotten the awesome, TF2 that we all love.
Seriously, okay? But, yeah, let's get started. In the red corner, one shudders to imagine what inhuman thoughts lie behind its mask, the Pyro. And in the blue corner, I fear no man, but this Pyro, she scares me. The other Pyro.
All right.
As usual, the first round is going to be health. The TF2 Pyro is tied for the third highest health in the game with Devilman at 175. The TFC Pyro is tied for the highest health in the game with Heavy and Soldier at 100.
Dang.
And like all the classes in TFC, the Pyro has armor, but unlike Soldier and Heavy, she has the medium armor type rather than the heavy armor type.
Oh.
Medium armor absorbs 60% of damage taken, and the Pyro has 150 armor points.
Okay.
This effectively means that with full health and full armor, the TFC Pyro is able to take 250 damage before dying. And that's almost as much health as the TF2 Pyro has when overhealed. So the original Pyro has a pretty clear advantage.
Let's say
in
the
round
TFC
one.
Classic got that one, man, or the TF
For round number
Classic
2,
got that.
one speed, we have a tie. Both versions of Pyro run at the same speed of 100%.
Okay. Tie.
Next, we're going to look at Pyro's general abilities. In both games, Pyro is immune to afterburn, so they will not be ignited by fire-based weapons. However, the TFC Pyro is actually only resistant to afterburn if she has armor. If the armor is depleted, you lose that immunity. Which would make TF2 win this round, but if we're including the ability of bunny hopping here, then things do kind of go the other way. Bunny hopping is a thing in TFC for all classes, and allows for way more mobility than is normally available in TF2. I do kind of feel like bunny hopping could be its own category on its own, but that does feel kind of excessive, and it is a natural ability of every class, so I do think it's mostly fine to include here in abilities. And while the TF2 Pyro does have better afterburn immunity, the greatly increased mobility of bunny hopping pretty handily tips us to the TFC side.
Dang. Let's say the TF Classic might win it on this one, man. We might have another win for the TF Classic.
Speaking of things not in the sequel, we have the grenade round.
The grenades.
And yeah, this is basically a free round for TFC, but it's a necessary one to cover, so we'll just get it out of the way. Like the TFC Heavy, the Pyro has a regular hand grenade, which can deal a lot of damage in a fairly large radius. It can also be used to grenade jump, though this does obviously damage the user. Pyro also has a napalm grenade, which deals less direct damage than the hand grenade, but can ignite the ground and cause
And like I said, I just played TF Classic for the first time about a week ago, and I actually really enjoyed it, man. I'm also a sucker for the older style graphics. This reminds me of games like Unreal Gold or like some older, you know, some Quake and stuff. Just those type of graphics, man, they're just so cool. You know, now it's just so cool to have that retro look.
Afterburn. And yeah, this round does go to TFC by default, but if you're thinking ahead, the TF2 Pyro does have its own way to deal with grenades. I'm sure you already know, but we'll get to that later. For the first weapons round, we really don't have anything very special. The TFC Pyro just has the crowbar, which functions identically to Scout and
I say, do they all have the crowbar for TF Class? Does every TF Classic class have the crowbar? It's like the only melee thing?
Crowbar. And the TF2 Pyro has the Fire Axe, which functions identically to Heavy's Fists. And if we learned anything from those previous comparisons, it's that the crowbar is pretty bad.
Yeah, because it's so...
no armor Heavy with 100 health.
It just doesn't do a lot of damage.
2.02 seconds to kill. That's almost double the time it takes for the Fire Axe, which is able to deal more than enough damage to kill a 100 health Big Earner Spy in 1.06 seconds with only 2 hits. The crowbar may swing super fast, but its horribly low damage makes it basically worthless. Though considering that Pyro has much better options at close range, melee damage isn't all that important. But even then, this is still an easy win for TF2.
Alright.
Round 6 is another repeat round from what we've seen before. And for a while, I actually thought the TFC Pyro had the double-barreled shotgun, but no, she only has a single barrel.
Oh.
Which, as I've pointed out the previous 2 times we've seen it, can only deal a max of 20.
Well, you might as well just go ahead and give this one a TF2, because if all she's got is that regular one, it only does what, like up to, I think he said like, was it 18 or like 24 or something shot? Or I think the crowbar. Crowbar was something, they were really close together, which is crazy. One of them was 18, one of them was like 24.
4 damage per shot if all its pellets
Okay, yeah.
The TF2 shotgun can deal almost 4 times more damage at close range with a max of 90 and can kill a 100 health class in 0.43 seconds.
Look at that, dude.
Shotgun's 2.02 seconds.
Easy win for TF2.
And while I've made it pretty clear that I think a single-barreled shotgun is a horrible, nearly useless weapon, it might actually have some use in this matchup. Don't get me wrong, the TF2 shotgun is still infinitely better, but because there's no damage fall off in TFC, it could actually be decent for getting a small amount of chip damage, because unlike the other classes, the TF2 Pyro really doesn't have any ranged options by default, and the single-barreled shotgun actually does have a better damage output at longer ranges than the TF2 shotgun. So this may be the only time I say this, but the single-barreled shotgun isn't totally useless here. The TF2 shotgun is still much more powerful at the shotgun's ideal range though, and that's what really matters. So,
it's easily TF2.
This next round will be for something that I want to cover before we get to the next 2 weapons, and that's Afterburn. In both games, fire-based weapons will continue to cause damage for a period after hitting an enemy. In TF2, Afterburn deals 4 damage per tick and hits 2 times a second. The damage of Afterburn won't stack from multiple sources, though the duration of it can. In TFC, Afterburn can stack from multiple sources, which sounds like it could be good, but it only deals 2 damage to start. And it gets worse, because Afterburn in TFC only inflicts damage 1 time per second, meaning if you're on fire for 4 seconds, you will only take 8 damage of Afterburn, where in TF2 you would have taken 32.
Yeah.
Basically, you could kind of think of it like all Afterburn in TFC has the Degreaser's Afterburn, but it could also stack with other Afterburn.
Okay.
Though that does mean you would need 4 sources of fire for it to even reach the same damage per second as TF2's Afterburn. The Afterburn in TFC does block more of the target's screen, which I guess could be a little bit helpful, but I doubt it really has that much of an impact on their aim. This whole round really isn't all that relevant because both Pyros aren't going to be affected by it for the most part, but I think it makes it pretty clear that Afterburn in TF2 is way stronger.
Way better, yeah.
For round 8, we're going to be breaking our rules a little bit by comparing the TFC Pyro's incendiary cannon to the flare gun in TF2.
Okay.
I guess going forward, if there's some kind of direct parallel between a TFC weapon and a TF2 unlock, we'll see how they compare. You could argue that the incendiary cannon in TFC is closer functionality-wise to the scorch shot in TF2, but the flare gun is kind of like the base version of that, so we'll stick to the flare gun.
Okay, makes sense.
And the incendiary cannon is effectively just a weaker version of the rocket launcher used for igniting targets from a distance.
Wow.
The incendiary cannon is capable of firing roughly every 1.14 seconds, never has to reload, and holds 20 reserve ammo.
It never has to reload, bro. That's really good, man.
Flare gun, which only fires every 2 seconds and holds 16 ammo. The incendiary cannon is also capable of dealing more damage than the flare gun with its direct hit. but it's also capable of dealing less. Yeah, interestingly, the direct damage from the rockets is somewhat random. According to the wiki, it could range from 30 to 60, but I've had it go as low as 20.
Wow.
And while the direct hit damage can be random, the splash damage always seems to be 20. Those rockets will explode on contact with players and surfaces, and that splash radius is actually pretty massive.
Wow.
But this explosion doesn't really seem to cause much.
That was a big radius for that, man. A big radius.
Knockback, so you're not really going to be able to rocket jump with it. And afterburn from the incendiary cannon is just as weak as we talked about before. It only lasts for 4 seconds, so it only has a total of 8 damage. The flare gun's afterburn lasts for 7.5 seconds for a total of 60. And the incendiary cannon's rockets, they're pretty slow.
I was say there, you can see those coming a long
about
way.
the same length, and it takes the flare gun's flare 0.46 seconds to hit from the opposite side. A rocket from the incendiary cannon takes more than 2 full seconds longer at 2.49 seconds.
Dang.
You can get up, you could do some stretches, you could file your taxes, and by the time you get back, well, it would hit you because 2.49 seconds isn't that long. I mean, come on, don't be ridiculous. But though in the context of TF2, that's an extremely slow projectile that I can't imagine makes direct contact with enemies very often. But the incendiary cannon is clearly meant more for choke point spam rather than direct damage. This is roughly how its stats would look as a secondary unlock in TF2 based off the flare gun stats. And that might seem like an excessive amount of stats, because it is, but I felt like they were all notable enough to include. The upsides of this weapon would all be great, but the downsides would also be really, really bad. It explodes on surfaces, it fires relatively fast compared to the flare gun, and has a big explosion radius. But, with how weak the afterburn is, how relatively weak the splash damage is, and how extremely slow the projectile is, I don't think it would be anything more than just a very mild annoyance.
Yeah.
And it would certainly be overshadowed by the Scorch Shot, with its faster projectile, knockback, and much better afterburn. And even compared to the flare gun, which lacks any explosion radius, I don't think I could say that the incendiary cannon would even be better for spam. And going into this, I thought it was going to be much better than it is, but the incendiary cannon is honestly not very good.
Really?
Yeah, you can hit splash damage pretty easily. But
I'll say it doesn't have to, like, reload. It's got huge splash damage, but it's got so many other things, like a 2.5 seconds to, or almost 3 seconds for the rocket to hit you across the map. That's a lot, man, because you could dodge that really easily, and then it really doesn't matter. You know, at that point, you might as well have the flare gun
with 8 afterburn. The flare gun's flare already does more than that on its own, and then it deals afterburn after that. And it crits burning players. Yeah, TFC technically wins this round by default because the incendiary cannon is a default weapon, but TF2 gets the symbolic victory here because the flare gun is just better overall.
It is, yeah.
And this is it, the last weapon round. The flamethrower against the flamethrower. And because these things throw flames, neither can be used underwater. They just produce harmless bubbles.
Harmless
in both
bubbles.
games, they carry 200 maximum ammo, but in TFC, it takes about 30 seconds to use it all up, while on TF2, it only takes 21.3 seconds.
Oh.
And while both weapons have limited range, the TFC's flamethrower has a further reach. The TFC version also has 50% damage fall off, where the TFC version has no fall off at all. Which would make you think that the TFC version has the clear range advantage, and while that would make sense, that's actually not how it works out. The flamethrowers in both games are definitely not the most consistent weapons, and the average time it took to deal 100 damage varied for both. So for both weapons, I did it 5 times so we could kind of figure out an average. At close range for the TFC flamethrower, I got 0.58 seconds, 0.38 seconds, 1.47 seconds, 0.56 seconds, and 0.34 seconds, which averages out to 0.666 seconds.
Wow.
In TF2, I got 1.16, 1.15, 1.11, 1.16, and 1.11, which averages out to 1.138. So, hypothetically, the TFC flamethrower is better at the closest range.
Yep.
But you'll notice that the numbers vary a lot more than they did for TF2.
Yeah, they're a lot more
and
stable on
at medium range,
TF2.
it gets even worse. For TF2's medium range, I got 1.38, 1.3, 1.36, 1.35, and 1.38 for an average of 1.354.
Dang.
But for TFC, I got 2.05, 3.34, 2.04, 2.04 again, and 7.05. That's an average of 3.304. And even if we consider that 7.05 seconds a fluke, the average of the other 4 is 2.37, which is still way worse than what TF2 got. So how is it possible that it does worse at longer range if TFC has no falloff?
Yeah.
Well, to start, as you might have noticed, the TFC flamethrower has oddly high knockback, so you have to adjust to how it pushes the target. But also, the flame hitboxes are so much smaller in TFC. Despite how big they might look visually, they're not big at all.
I was say with like how, you know, how large the flame is when it comes out, I kind of assumed the hitbox on it was going to be like insane.
Close you need to be to hit fire in TF2. Look how far away the crosshair is from the target. And this is how close you need to be to hit it in TFC. It's hard to explain just how awkward the flamethrower feels in this game if you haven't played it. The flames look bigger than they actually are, they're not transparent at all, so you can barely see the target, and there's no hit sound, so you can barely get any kind of feedback when you're actually hitting someone.
Wow.
Just to demonstrate how much easier and more consistent the TF2 flamethrower is, flailing the TFC flamethrower at medium range killed in 4.38 seconds, and doing it in TF2 killed in 1.36 seconds. Not only is that much faster, but it's also completely in line with the non-flailing medium range damage.
Yeah.
The TF2 flamethrower is also able to shoot through multiple enemy players and buildings, while the TFC flamethrower cannot.
I was to say, yeah, it is looking like it's leaning toward TF2 here for the flamethrower, because that is
enough.
Oh.
The TFC flamethrower only ignites targets for 4 seconds, which is the minimum time the TF2 flamethrower can ignite. And as we've talked about before, TF2 Afterburn is way better. And if all that wasn't enough to convince you the direction this is going, the TF2 flamethrower has Air Blast, while the TFC one doesn't. It lets the user push enemies back, reflect projectiles, and extinguish teammates, all of which are super useful abilities to have. Air Blast hasn't always been in TF2, but it has been for the vast majority of the game's existence, and it gives the TF2 flamethrower so many options that the original one is just not at all capable of. Ignoring the damage differences in the smaller fire hitbox, this is roughly how the TFC flamethrower would look in TF2. And this would just be terrible. So this round pretty overwhelmingly goes to TF2.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
And that brings us to
the final round.
Who wins 1v1? Let's take a look at some of the major pros and cons of each version. The TF2 Pyro has generally more powerful weapons. Notably, the shotgun would be especially useful against an afterburn immune enemy. The TF2 flamethrower is also much more consistent and easier to get damage with. And probably most importantly, the flamethrower has Air Blast, which gives the TF2 Pyro much more control of how close the TFC Pyro can get, and can reflect the TFC Pyro's projectiles. But on the other hand, the TFC Pyro has more mobility with bunny hopping and grenade jumping. The TFC Pyro even has the range advantage, with a slightly further flamethrower reach and a lack of damage fall off on the shotgun. And probably most importantly, the original Pyro is a lot bulkier. She's just able to tank more damage before dying.
Definitely more health.
The absolute best case scenario for the TF2 Pyro killing the TFC one would actually not be with the flamethrower, but with the shotgun at the closest range, killing in 3 hits in roughly 1.18 seconds. And going off the absolute best time I got for the TFC flamethrower, the TFC Pyro could hypothetically kill the TF2 one in roughly 0.595 seconds if those flames consistently connect.
Wow.
And as super specific as that setup might be, it still does give the best case time advantage to TFC.
Yeah.
So yes, in the absolute best case scenario for each class, the TFC Pyro wins. But that requires perfect aim and for the TF2 Pyro to be doing basically nothing. So that's why I gotta say that I think TFC loses this one. The TF2 Pyro is the winner of the 3rd round of TF2 versus TFC. So it's my understanding that in TFC, the Pyro is considered to be a particularly weak class. Where the TFC Scout was really weak offensively, dealing damage wasn't his job. The TFC Pyro is seemingly an offensive class, but one that lacks good damage-dealing weapons. And is a class made for close range that really doesn't even have very good close-range options. The TFC Pyro doesn't even have the double-barreled shotgun, which most of the classes in TFC have. And look, I don't think it would be impossible for the TFC Pyro to ever beat the TF2 one, but you'd have to be pretty cheesy about it. If I had to put a somewhat arbitrary number on this, I would say it would maybe be like 35-65 in TF2's favor. Heavy versus heavy would maybe be like 55-45 for TFC, and Scout versus Scout was like 5-95. I guess it would be possible by pure luck that the TFC Scout wins at least once. But I think if the TFC Pyro just constantly ran away and got chip damage with the shotgun, and maybe some splash damage with projectiles, you could eventually wear the TF2 Pyro down enough to approach. You could also try to brute force your way to victory with armor and simply outdamage the TF2 Pyro, but Air Blast shuts that down pretty well. And despite having less weapons, I think the TF2 Pyro has so many more options, especially because of Air Blast. Not only does Air Blast make spamming grenades and projectiles more dangerous, but it also prevents the TFC Pyro from getting close. It also can't be overstated how much easier to use and more consistent the TF2 Flamethrower is. I don't care how good that TFC Pyro's aim is, even in a purely WM1 battle, I think the TF2 Pyro still wins pretty easily. Maybe not every single time, but it would definitely be an uphill battle for TFC. Now you might say in the grand scheme of things that the Pyro in TF2 still isn't that great, but in the transition between games and the many updates since then, The TF2 Pyro has become much stronger and more versatile than it was in TFC. And regardless of how you feel about Pyro, I think we have a much better class because of that. So yeah, in a head-to-head between the two of them, I think Beatrice over here would probably meet the same fate she did in the comics.
Excuse me! I'm in need of medical attention!
Wow.
And that was the Pyro vs. Pyro video.
All right, man. Thank you, dude, so much for being here. As usual, I'll be sure to put the original video link down for Squim Jim channel here if you want to go check them out, and please do, because this series has been fantastic, man. I know there's a few more of these, so if you want to see me continue to react to them, just let me know in the comments down below. And if there's anything else you need to see me react to, doesn't have to be TF2, can be whatever you want. You just let me know, and I'll be sure to put it on the list to make. So if you haven't already, also hit the like button. It helps out the channel here. And that's all I got for you. So I will see you in the next video. And do not forget, it's Work Army for life.